Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Parto Dani Kyabsanche Dage Shinzo Yebe Chonam Gi Dola Panjira Sangye Ndu Parasho Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Parto Dani Kyabsanche Dage Shinzo Yebe Chonam Gi Dola Panjira Sangye Ndu Parasho Sangye Chudan Soki Chanam La Chanchu Parto Dani Kyabsanche Dage Shinzo Gibe Chonam Gi Rola Penjira Sangye Ndu Parasho Simchen Tamche Dewa Dewe Gyudan Dembara Gyurche Simchen Tam Dungal Dan Dungal Gi Gyudan Tawara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Tam Mindawara Simchen Tamche Nirin Chadan Nidan Cha Dan Nyumla Nebara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dewa Dewe Gyudang Dembara Gyurche Simchen Tam Dungal Dan Dungal Gi Gyudang Chalwar Gyurche Simchen Tam Dungal Mebe Dewa Tam Mindal Wargi Simchen Tamche Nirin Chadan Nidan Cha Dan Nyumla Nebara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dewa Dewe Gyudang Dembara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dungal Gi Gyudang Chalwar Gyurche Simchen Tam Dungal Mebe Dewa Tam Minda Simchen Tamche Nirin Chadan Nidan Cha Dan Nyumla Nebara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dewa Tam Dewe Gyudang Dembara Gyurche Simchen Tamche Dungal Gi Gyudang Chalwar Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Tam Minda Simchen Tamche Nirin Chadan Nidan Cha Dan Nyumla Nebara Gyurche Sashibyoji Chuji Mento Chang Riro Linji Nyelde Yembandi Sangye Jindu Medembu Ai Rugunanda Jinla Chubarasho Idam Guru Rana Mendala Kanya Ataya Amin.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Niram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami.
Kange tuje nyezongwa tawa tangje pambe chire tambe chini tangje be kodam te la cha ta lo ya da ta chunju ki ta jin nyamje ke nyamlen che sa da tir chimba chene ta te ran la ta dung aran jinjin be jip char zhe je ta ji ke sunggu reswa ta samlenane jabo tata chi thede na ranjin tarung pacha damasun de derwa nyomon tarung ngunjur pangtu biao mare yode re kole kendo thore mada tadung ranjin ngaso ne ba kege ansar che de dire tindigole jip chabo che ranjin ta kandeji kyen kadiyo ba de jip chabo che ji tang kwe tu bor tendi cha diores.
And so here within these instructions within the way of the Bodhisattva, then there are the instructions on equalizing and exchanging self and other. And in particular here, in regard to what it all comes down to, our own self-cherishing, these verses are really doing some heavy analysis on this inner psychological situation, in this inner mechanics, mental mechanics. And you know, that there is still self-cherishing is indicated by the point that we still have arising negative emotions, and that we haven't been able to abandon till this point, the negative and destructive emotions. And so therefore, with this deep analysis, we find a lot of demerits and faults within this mind of self-cherishing. And if we don't find fault at this point, while we are still in the situation of having afflictive emotions, then that which harms us will continue to go on. And so here, there is an emphasis here and deep analysis within this section of the way of the Bodhisattva.
Oh, Garum Sungda, Nampich, Tendi but the Tumbar is Shivuji Pe, Jiptavachide, Tendi Petaji de Gala Tampo, Rapetaji. Tenima Tarunani, Jipsar Nugorwa. What a Taranajing also, Ranchinzingi, also Gyontangore. Ranchinjing also Numon Pilgis Tangore, Numon Shuchur Tangore, Numon Put Pitar Tangore, Numon Tizam Fitar Chinside, Mazo Dungal, Mount Dugore. Roa. Tindi Dungal dem Dugimena, Ranchinzin like Kendo Tawada, the Missiva Ketchmuchadiore. And a Ranchinzi Kent Tawata Maimba, Tarun Ship Tarujene, Tape. Dajen Jene, Sambejis to the Galatape, Shivuji, Jet Hane, Tape, that Jenchinzingi and Denton, Ranchinzingi, Gun the Tonsane, the room, Be Ranchinzingi, Gun Jip Sabo, Jensitan is Sundi, Shivuji, Matsu Karsore, Jipa Mountain Guajik, Chagadua, Ripan Dimji. Someone never thought was Chagat was.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn my volume up a little. Okay. And so His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, always speaks about this, the holy Dharma, being very much in accord with the way scientific observations and analysis operate. And in doing scientific analysis, then they take the object of observation at hand, And then first do a broad analysis, a kind of a course analysis. And the more analysis goes on, the more that goes on, then the more finer tuned and the more subtle do their observations get, until they're actually looking at their object of observation in great detail, really getting down to the nitty-gritty, we could say. And so in the same way, then we need to do the same thing with our own attitudes of egocentricness and self-cherishing. For if we don't, then the situation is that our own self-cherishing attitude leads to the increase and intensification of our negative emotions. And if we have more and more intense negative emotion, then that means that we are to experience more suffering. And so if we don't want suffering, then we need to get down to that nitty-gritty, and we need to find fault and see that within our attitudes, to have a self-cherishing attitude, really see the fault, see the downside, see the cons in this. But not only that, not only do we need to see that the negative emotions are at fault and they harm us, we also need to be working on increasing or having a shift in our mentality, so that we're turning our focus. Not only are we seeing that this being focused solely on ourselves is not good, we now train in shifting our focus so that our main focus is to care about others, is to really put ourselves in others' place, to really serve others. And so this is another part of the process. And so at this point, it's very important that we look at the qualities, the good that comes out of caring for others, the altruistic mental attitude, and continue to look at the fault of self-interest. Really seeing this and analyzing very finely, analyzing it with your own intelligence, with like your faculty of intelligence. Really do some analyzation.
ranjin la shira roti chabu yin da ranjin kyong tong ya la pe khabo ya re ranjin kyong tong ya la pe khabo re jaza yip chabo je de ne de je sam ma ta na ranjin kyong ta ya le la bu ji ten za ni na ma re wa de ni de ga la nga zo de da nyam to ji yin jin yin den ta ya la yin la 수술업 진진진지나 개pen 가려봐 리부 가려온 거와 따뜻 섬당고다 진진진 제바이나 리부 다 상기 고팡 타르투나 상기 고팡 내가 수술라 애니페 젠라 판단나 셈데 되기지 락도와 애니 풀라 디경제네 손음 라보지사네 상기 고팡 두고 걸어와 되게디 삼는 배땅과대 빼 미스베게 전부 차대요. 아니 도스제네니 즉다 수수 로단 참바지네 삼땅과대 빼 미스베게 전부래. 그잔디네 남가다마선 숨당도 지진나진지 다 삼땅 투이나 지진나진 삼땅 대땅 투마트구나 야 다닝 받아 살바즈네 ranjinjin kumbu ingen daateri saltak ani jenjinjin jendenge ani be te saltak ti kepende godruche ani ranjinjin kyondo thongina o tati kyondo di dire ani jenjinjin endendela to alegirwa jen chebarzunga dela pendo yobaji thungurwa thona semnala gananjile ganalena ti pabe 같이 딜라니 주야 레라 누구 알아?
가난 카렐라 가나.
젠진진. Joalena, Tilani Benjuela, Kung, Dobachir Legore. What is it? Get Chimbore, and it go, Misiba, young, or Pechitin, Ajin, was a young woman to Tate Karina Sunday, Semba Jumwe Omare. Maranzo, Your Toma Mebane, Ranjin, Shuchumbo, sometime the Inza, Lenza, Telekund Taya Kabote. Oh, that Kale, Munju Janju Sebadani, Yuala Soba, Jumden, the Mumuludu Sove, Kaleti Gabre, then Ajin Kale given tea, Najinji to Tawade, Pe Monam Sunjani Gawade, Pe Mizuke Chemore. Your Mutsunda. Junju Tonta Hamogona, Junju Fetchang Gokeni, Chinlep Jis, Garum Sunda. Tigit Sonam Sagres Sunda. Sonam Chizam Sagatri, Tenico, Tonta de Saru Yungwe Ajichagorwa. The Miss Kachimore, so Sem Jungway Junior. Semlo Popa Katina, Semlo Popa Tanchevan Chawachagua, the Miss Kachimore.
Basically speaking, to be able to totally find fault right away in our own attitude of self-cherishing is very difficult, because this is something that is is very embedded attitude in us. This is something that we have habituated for a very long time. And so to really come to the point of seeing it as a complete fault is something that is very, very hard to do. And that is why it is very important to take the time to be fastidious about our analyzing the faults in it from all different directions, and really continue to emphasize this as a point of analysis and a point of looking for our own self-improvement and self-development. We must continue to be, very, very fastidious and really in great detail, really to begin to see it, because it's just not easy to do at all. But then again, so we emphasize continuing to see how these mental attitudes are faulty and how they harm us, while at the same time, we remember to be analyzing also all of the good things that come through the altruistic attitude. And so we look and say, okay, well, if I do have a shift in my attitude and I am beginning to develop an attitude that really focuses on others, then what's the profit? What's the benefit? What are the pros here? And what is the result? Well, the result, ultimately, the ultimate result is to attain the state of an enlightened being, to attain the level of Buddhahood. And this is something that we can do ultimately and eventually. And in the meantime, temporarily, until we reach that ultimate state, the state of enlightenment, the state of Buddhahood, then the altruistic attitude brings to the one who holds it a great peace of mind. And also is very meritorious. And whenever there is an accumulation of merit, when we're involved in meritorious activities, all of that goes towards, it's cumulative until we reach the point of enlightenment, we reach the point of Buddhahood. And so it's very, very important that we're persistent and we're fastidious about continuing to look at these points to the best of our ability, to the best of our mental capability. That's what we do. And if you're able, you can remember back to the technique of visualizing the old self, which was the very ego, so we have a visualization of the old self and the new self, the old self being one's former self that was very egocentric and self-cherishing, and the new self that now sees that an altruistic way in this world is the beneficial way to go. And so if one can meditate back on now, looking back at the activities of that egotistical self from this new perspective, and one can really see from that perspective, what was I thinking? That, that kind of an attitude, it wasn't helpful, it wasn't good. And so those are, really, really, it's of great benefit. That's the profit. That's what we have to gain here. And so we continue to look at our own attitude of selfishness and see it and say, oh, this is it. Now I see it. It's so when we're looking in that like visualization of from the new self back at the old self, we can look and say, there it is. I see it. That is self-centeredness. That is negative emotion. Now I see it. And once we see it, then it brings to us, like it re-energizes us and excites us and inspires us to keep going, because it's a signpost. We've seen, oh, this is what they're talking about. Now I got it. And so this inspires us, and therefore our desire really grows. We have a greater desire to continue to follow these practices, to follow this path. And so just like, but it's very important that perhaps we don't, we read the verses and we read about what Master Shantideva is saying and saying, well, I haven't been able to do it like that. My practice isn't like that. And Geshe-la says, then please don't be discouraged. Don't feel like it's not something that you can attain. Because this is, something that we've vowed to do. We've taken those 3 vows. And so we have to continue on to, hold our pledges, to continue to see the faults, to see the faults in self-cherishing and to work towards altruism. But, this is something, that's very, very hard to do, because since beginningless time, we've really, we've been operating in this way that it has become autopilot, and since beginningless time. And so to change course is not something that's going to happen all of a sudden, but it can indeed, we can indeed get there. And so don't feel at all discouraged, but continue to dive into this practice, and even to supplicate to be able, do supplication prayers that one may be able to understand the meaning. If one doesn't feel like they have understood completely, do supplication prayers to supplicate for the blessings, for the meaning to be able to dawn in your mind. And just like His Holiness said, even for those that read the way of the Bodhisattva and they say, I don't get it, I'm not getting it. His Holiness says, even by placing this text on the crown of your head, then this is very beneficial, because it brings blessings and it brings merit. And if we have merit, then through our increasing merit, that sees to the fact that actually we begin to have clarity of understanding. So those 2 things correlate. So don't be discouraged at all. Actually be very inspired, be very hopeful, and enter into this with great hope and courage and inspiration.
Nyambalen densem gomsul ani mawale ngagel gomsul zerde wata te indigala ta ngoni thado ngone da ngargel ngone densem ngone mare ko karchana ti cheina suso ranchinjing kyong garu thongde yore jinjinjing ene thongde yore Tarung Jip Tabo Jede, Dendi Jidgala, Pe Jip Tabo Jena Ranjin Gyonzaleki Tabshijre. Jip Tabo Jene. What that day in Dugala, Taksan Page Nyambalan Densem Siade, Shibuke Chambuchadiore. Maranzo Lobjon Chekinjina, Densena Lobjon Yargen Rudoa. Densem Majana Lobjon Yargen Rumida. Karichane Chase and Dechana. Thing was a Densen and Dilagre. Yuntengi member wala Jedangi pushing Guela Gore. Yuntengi member wala. Yunden member me Yundempe, Chimbocha me, Melchi Chimbocha Dondala. Jedangi pushing Gores, Jedan Suzo and Be, Densem Gores. Densem in the pushing zone, pushing Yal Shing Pe Campo Yabu and a member Gura. Suzo and Pe Bezu Yabuche and Susu Zindo Jibating and the Densemiana, Yargen Dura, Lobjon Yargen Dura. Cook Monijini, Kolape, Katichago Marwa, Suzu Lobjon Yargeton Dueton Tarwa. Nama Pujong Chambada Konan Zindo Jibani, Tango Zindanala Shibuji, and Densemche. And a Gishita Sardochi di Gilape, Jela Garizone, Kura Katinlangape Avuchasons, Chibi cannot the Katinlanga Avuchasons at the Dusini, Majuju or Sumudo. Pujong Chambazani Pe, Kiba Chimburi.
Ani Kongits and Kariragena push.
Kunta Zindajibayarwa. Telling him on Densem Jama Gishita Juda, and Chidi Chile Gelatani. Krizitane. Kuran Katinlangape, Lobjon, any be Gitan to it, and Diniji can the lessons. Conzinda Chipa the young, Pujong Jamba the Nijinic, Kuran Katinlangape, Lobjon Yabuchasons, Denis Mungiore, Sumudo.
Oh, Lasso.
What can't you? Tandandin, Densem say Mingitaya there. Can't you? Ranchin Kuntaya Densem Remata, Densem Wana Mare.
So now picking up where we left off before, which was to arouse and meditate on jealousy, jealousy and competitiveness. So towards those that are our equals, then we have feelings of competitiveness, and to those who we feel are inferior to us, then we have feelings of arrogance and pride. And so these we should understand as we recall and re-arouse these feelings, that we're not looking to arouse real jealousy and real competitiveness, not the kind that afflicts us, but rather we arouse them so that we have something to observe and in ourselves, so that we can observe them in ourselves, and that this gives us something now as the object of our observation, to something to finally scrutinize in the way that we used to have them arising before. And so, so that's an important point to remember. But also then when it comes to the feeling of competitiveness, in some ways, competitive feelings really force us to work harder. For example, within school, you know, we really want to do well in school, and sometimes this comes out of, you know, competition. You know, we're trying to get a good grade, we're trying to be a good student compared to other students, and so on. And so also then there is this verse that says that in order to achieve the good, like the good quality of a blazing fire, then we need to use the firewood of competitiveness, of rivalry. And so this rivalry is like that wood that, causes, the more, like the wood you have, when the wood is good, you've got this blazing fire. And competitiveness and rivalry in these ways can drive us to do well in something, to make progress in something. Just as the way in school, for example, this feeling of competitiveness can help us progress, and it really benefits our studies. And then also there is this one story that there was this geshe who eventually attained, the scholastic accomplishment of attaining the level of a geshe, but started in, the very like low grades, like in the first grade, and was very competitive against the other, students and so forth. And so in the end, when he finally reached, the level of being a geshe, he thanked each and every one of those people, the other students that he had felt competitive against, recognizing them, that they actually helped him, get where he was. So in any event, we should understand when we're talking here in these practices and trainings about meditating on competitiveness and so forth, jealousy, what we're doing is we're identifying these things. It's not like we really want to become afflicted.
Nopala jarwa gawa kiwa sida ta chanchu sibi nyamne ngone tiridwa nga zo susi kiwa ina ranjinzi tupo shu chumbo yungena nopala jarna gawa kiwa maro dungal kiwa nopala jarna nga kachi son samsam yungurwa da kono zupe mi jenjige nopa ne kegena tadung pe zopa gomya dantene che yungda nopala jarna gawa kiwa sida semgi mi kyabra ta chanju semgi yenden wa te tesukanga chanju semgi yenden wa wada tu tezere ene pe kechmu duas sabje qur'anin be jujagaru tayung udwa
okay nyen kor yunten dang trak dene sumpa onda
lekbi namda jelan tembas
lekbi namtrang And so now back to our text, where we're continuing to look at the feelings, some of the negative feelings that can arise to those that we feel are on equal playing field with. And we look at 4 different situations. First, we look at the feelings that arise when someone is being like respected and venerated. That's number 1. Number 2, we look at the feelings that arise in us when someone else has good qualities and has attained name and fame, or recognition of some kind. And then third, we look at when in the numerous, like when someone has like numerous like excellences and goodness. And the fourth one is we look at when there is a harm doer, someone who is giving, us a situation where they're harming us, they're presenting us with harm. And so we look at what these situations naturally cause to arise in us. So there's a difference between bodhisattvas and ordinary beings. For ordinary beings like us, when someone harms us, brings harm to us, does something that's not, that's something that's malicious, we right away we're like, what are you doing? What are you doing this to me for? Right away. And so it hurts us. We actually feel hurt, and we often will have a reaction because it hurts us. But with now being trainees, being on the path of training in the mind of bodhicitta, so a bodhisattva wouldn't react. This wouldn't affect a bodhisattva in the same way. The harm doer would do the same thing, but a bodhisattva would just forbear it. They would be patient. There wouldn't actually be like this incurring harm that they experienced. And so that's really one of the great qualities of having the mind of bodhicitta. It's really very, very precious. And so these four different, areas of looking at our reaction with these things benefit us greatly.
Tako subject Quran di digala shivu di chagwa mindo ata parzana nyengul ndemba sidugala ta chanjus ta rajingyamji nyamlin checking kaza ni re deorwa niga chanju separe deore ani chidi lata nyengul chila nyengul nyepad Bodhichitta mena ta chila ti yongya tabshin bezu chedre
Nika Jangchub Sampa
Nika chadeor that rajing nyamlin checking chadeor Nika danda Nika danda chidala nyungur cheone chidala vinja ta khub ti yongya bezu chigorwa wata tindi jo mata di jen chayo mar tati shivu 니가 전심 적인데 니가 하게 민전 차들 전주습의 민전 차들다. 나중 냠적인 냠는적인 차들이래. 아니 연된 찔레게 되니 찔레 말마게 밖에 베스지야래. 베스지네. 어다 된데래.
디 앙트랑 카츠레 데라 Gyatang
gyata
Shipju
jitu no re jitu ningop chupurdu redo oda tire ta inju ti ta
Peltier nge ani angchang kakare yingire Nyendro drupe kornewa nepa drola
kare tosgo a gyata jitu ba derecha ta subject tang bode da tang nyamla to nani kangerangil taje chirze de kesandro sonte jitu ba yadang tuju jibju jebtin ya da jebtin jebke jergu ngapchu dire ta
oh laso yeah sheptin okay
nyengul ndembata tangpo nyengul ndembata da nyamla sonane se ne nyengul ndembache chini da ge yondeni se de ani yondel ndembata che da ge gyen fanja ji sidugala lebi namra jelande bada gyendu marzu suzikeu ina gyendu begi orwa gyenve rangi gyenve ani yonden nyunyun jumena tonga chi orwa chanju sebata to rangi gyen bea chadela gyen de tonje ani gyen de ngwenjinje ani gyen de pangtap chi orwa dedo jardo jorla ani pe karsore zeguela sobate dai yang tangi sumalwa chene beche chegu orwa
ta
tangi sumalwa ta
타니스나 디 갑수 타니스나
다 배다 하장 교보 많이 봐. 양에너 소화 제고라서 봐. 코치도 준비 제고지 잘고 걸어.
라소
구마게 짜파게 간중만주제데 전주세 소화 배치 당 말와. 다 타니스만 와서 되가라고 렘바지. 하장 미기 유치모에나 과 둘로 직부잖아 니가 말해. 둘로 하장 교보잖아 미기 메라탄 거와. 어다 텐디 인디가라 테소 빼 렘바지 수수 최드 툼바지 고가래. 고물루르 생도 니송도 몰람 템게메나. 로베 초와 공판시 최든 처에 초월셔서 숨도. 로초제데 초와도 로초를 때는 니가 말해. 낭비 추바지. 다티는 빼
양켈책 데라 소로노
낭비 추바지기 초와데 로초를 때는 초나 니가 말해. 로베 초와제디가라 니레다
로베 초스나
로초 시디가라 로아 땡구수 종차도 배샤여와 용어보 그래서제 구마geb교 용어보지 초아지 아니 수수 양미지라 가서 톱긴절 와서데 아니 미지라니 배 수수 배샤도 왜요 바지 세보지 말아바지 우연던도 구유당이나 대 룽고 말해 갑돌라고 가래 우에나 갑돌라고 가래 갑돌라 롱고 가래 답에 미 탑해 가시기 갑돌을 만하지 니배 구유당 거도 어때서 니가 말해 간지 로베 니비 쳐와서 니파 님바 춘준다 수 전부 레바게데 님배 니비 쳐와라 그래
올라서
그래서 저거 말해
아니 장춥 샘플라
장추세마다 낭비 쳐봤지래 니가 말해 장추세마다 텔리간 인데
올라서 and so so now we look at these different within these different categories of verses that which is emphasized within these verses. We have the section where we look at the feelings that are aroused when we're with someone else who's always celebrated and venerated and by others and so forth. And actually, in one of the ways in the way to meditate on this, there are two individuals, and both of them are bodhisattvas. They both are, practicing bodhisattvas. And when they notice that another's qualities are, like when the other bodhisattva's qualities are adored or venerated, then they can see what the natural kind of instinctive reaction is, which is competitiveness towards that other, bodhisattva on equal level, and just notice it and identify it. But then the practice that is to come along from this is that what each of them does is really looks to lift the other one up, really help others see their qualities, really, help them. They really work to make others be the very best they can. And so in that way, that's kind of a very, very different reaction. But that all comes in this section where we have what's called being competitive towards someone with good qualities. And further on, we also examine the fact that what we look to do is hide our faults. So if we do have faults, we don't we don't advertise them for others. But what bodhisattvas do is they abandon those faults. They look to abandon their faults. And so, there are those that advertise their, their small good qualities, and those, that also, as we spoke about, don't advertise, like the bodhisattvas don't advertise, their qualities. And it's also very important that as practitioners on the path, that we look to find a very balanced ground on which to not to, like, it wouldn't be correct to be dressed so finely and all of this opulence and, have all of this, like kind of this using indiscretionally money and so forth, like to be dressed to the nines, times 100, nor would it be correct to be dressed like a beggar. So as a practitioner, we need to find balance. We need to find that balanced place in between. And so this is also an sikche di susongoredi.
Gumbulutu ke molam themke mazadi yare.
Okay.
Lo pe chowa kumfanjin chudin chowe chowar shos. Chuda tumbe chowa.
And so also Nagarjuna there is a verse that Nagarjuna has said, that he said, bless me so that I, find a fulfillment in a sufficient living. Meaning neither having too much money nor being like a beggar or a thief. And so he actually aspired. There is an aspiration.
Page Pabung Tanda Losungade Pabungi Lambrim Nalape Salvoyare.
And also, in Pabanka's Lamrim, in Liberation in the Palm of My Hands, finding this balance of contentment and fulfillment in a very humble living is something that is set out very clearly. And so actually, in terms of like right living and balanced living and so forth, a way of life, there are 5, if you read in that text, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hands, you'll see very clearly, you can read about that. And there are 5 different areas of making a living or living life that this is described.
Dangin ngamba yabu miji ngamba yabu jitane tingamba nga tru gugu yand dangin sinda dinang gyote shibu pembu junga shibu yabu jungna tru gundo da shigorwa tendi be yode tapcho go maram nang bechuna
yang di korla jose gebro nang
pena
yul kunelang
yo pena dangin nga miji pena razon de jingan dengi dollar yataina tatalunga yang dollar yaguina dengi roll draga dollar yata shibuji pembu jung pe yabuju pe pento jung sonzana turungundo da shigora shula otende kujutan yata chogo mare
laso
odela nyepi topkin jalwala nyepi tere. Ta kupe tadum dengin tege da pendo ta tarung wese chi gorwa musu mala bachini. Ani nyepi nyeba throwa zedegala ngempa chunchun jite ne pa be lata de chunchun jite ani chu be gomu chugi ngempa jite ne gomu yalen ya ki thapsi chigi na ti yang nyepa so pa ngempa chunchun da chu ngempa chimbu rae ki samda ya yang rugo mara ote chore tezu ken be mi gani karan gorta ya ki cherjiri do inguranda ote ndi choade de jar chogo mare.
And so as far as right living in these different categories, for example, within that book, you can read that there is a way to, of what you shouldn't do, and what one as a practitioner should not do. And one of them is to be deceptive and misleading. And even if you are misleading by omission, by not fully telling someone something. So for example, let's say there are two people, they're having a discussion and one of them feels like the other one is a foe or an enemy. They may, that first person is saying, oh, I'm going to go over here and, maybe I'll go there again. And the other person is like, oh, yeah, you should really go to that place. You should, but there's some information that they're leaving out by omission just to get that other person to do something, and so this is misleading and just trying, to trick someone, and this is something that we shouldn't do. And also, for example, if maybe there's two people and one person is giving a little gift and always like kind of, just looking for brownie points and giving a little gift, but really hoping that they get something back. Maybe they give something worth, $10 and they're expecting to get something back that's worth 100, that's more valuable. So just kind of, being manipulative like that, very incorrect way of conducting ourselves. And so we must be very, very careful of these things. So like in the first case, the first person didn't out and out lie, but they weren't explicit about something, but implicitly they alluded to something in order to kind of pull one off on someone they felt was their enemy. And so this is very inappropriate.
Kata janju sebata yin telekan ngaranzo sundajina chowa de chöde tumbaji chungwa de pemisiba kechimbre ta chöde tumbaze da 장보지니 chowa kan de jumen de chöde tumbare ta mi yende yojini dubya de ta chöde matumba chagwar tarduna.
And so in terms of being an inappropriate way to conduct ourselves for bodhisattvas, that goes without saying. But for us as training on this path, we must absolutely be very careful that all of our activities are in accord with the Dharma, that they match up, that they, are in accord with the Dharma. And one of the ways we can measure that is by honesty. So, let's think, if we're examining, is the way that I am making my living in accord with the Dharma? Well, if you're doing things honestly, if everything is on the up and up, then it's accord with the Dharma. But we think back to that first example where someone was implicit and alluding, and they were actually misleading. And so that would be inappropriate and not in accord with the Dharma.
Sumba membal ngajal gombasi dere toala chado gomsul nyambal dancing gomsul membal ngajal gomsul sta 다 멤버랑 아이걸 곰 지디가라 다 그 상가만이 파기 너팅 갑좀 줘서 면서다도 제 바다한세데 다 수수 마사 중네 다 수수 마사 대중 아니 다랑 데 젠레테니 삼르나가 오다 티치네 니페 수수 다 파기나진지 녜치 다 가르소래 전주 다진 제상한데 누나진지 네 두베 에투 냠바지 삼다다 포바케야데 인규란다 또 디나진지 녜치 투나 삼로 코레야데 다 드린 셰도 어때 멤버랑 아이갈 곰야데 다 틴 셰레스.
So now where we pick up, so remember we had this exchanging ourselves for others. We were going to exchange ourselves and put ourselves in the shoes of someone superior to us, someone on equal ground, and to someone inferior on us. And at this next verse, we will be doing the meditation on someone who is inferior, in some way lower status to us. And in that way, once we have put ourselves in those shoes, we now meditate, take the stance of someone who would be prideful towards someone who is lower than them. And in this way, we take, a good long look at that, look at the thinking of the other, person, and understand what's going on in that scenario. And then one can also understand from seeing that perspective the way that someone who has had a shift in focus towards altruism, what would a bodhisattva do? Now I know, the other way. Now I know how to be reformed from that, and I can do it. And the purpose of this is for one to be inspired, to be like rehabilitated from that old way. And this one will gain inspiration that one can turn over a new leaf. And so that's the point we're at now, the meditation on exchanging ourselves with someone who is inferior. And 100 and...
야당 중아지디 레그레
151.
딜라이 가르즈나 동 멤버랑 아이결 곰줄들라 나 sabje jitam gdo
Hola so.
아이결 곰베 남바 당스 아니 곰베 연된 아이결 곰베 연된
Di nipa di tampo.
tampo대 아이결 곰베 남바
Laso di tampo.
티니 곰베 연된 니바 숨바 곰네 저와 냠술랑술 지바데 텔터비 나겔 단델비 니미 당 니미 전다 견서리 지러와 다 나겔 원에 전화 견착으로와 다데 인지레 어다 두스네 sabje jitam 그 두스
So Youngkir chikti shipagi sabje shipa
텔터비 나겔 단델비 니미
nimik.
니미
Dine magomna.
니미 삼바스 다 당보데 나겔 곰베 남바텔라 디드로와 나겔 곰베 남바니 장주 세바 랑레 연된 첼라바 자두존네 나겔 곰바자 오세 숭도 오 Karchis tangedi
Karache sangechla.
maybe shot the shit. I don't
Oh.
Kokudo
The
Tandi Kunikogudo Tandi Meadow.
Oh. Inji yik
Oh,
denso.
Tandis.
Oh, lasso.
Tandis.
Okay. And so within this investigation and these trainings on utilizing the visualization of one that is inferior to oneself, then also there are 4 different sections coming up, like that looks at it from different directions. Like first one, like being different like different appearances of the meditation or different ways to meditate on this. Number 2, the qualities of meditating on this. Number 3, the way to bring these meditations, like integrate them onto the path. And then number 4, Dishipla Karegi Nyimik, Sampa?
Tiltapi Nagyal Dantilwe Nimi. Nagyal. Tiltapi Nagyal Dantilwe Nimi. Sambas. Nimi this. Ta Nagyal Mone na Kyungura. The Gyunde Samtangwa.
And the 4th is the mistakes and the misgivings of having pride, of being like connected to pride.
That Nagyal Gombe number the dirita, Ngapchunga Chipa Sholo Ngapchunga Chipa take it in Gore. Nyomu Diang Vatani, Lenchitun and Denjitas. Dida Tutan Sherapam, Zuri Norki, Nyamam cheese, the Sungdua. Tate Karsagore, Chanju Sebata, Lachin Sabuina, Ani Nyomotam, Membandita. That Karsagore. Simjenda Saja Simjenda Lenjidu Denham Jet Tana Ani Chanjuseba Legendi Tepadan Sherab Zuzan Ritan Norke Ta Roata Chanjuseba Legendi Vajan Jet Targendir de Roa Koranape Tepat Lapchambore Sherab Yore Zu Ri Nor Chisama Pe Halibajirwa. Ye Indigala, any Tenda Vojitape, Mensazunga de Mala Tendish Tomna, Nyambat Rajingi Kigrua. Di Kidetati, Tindish Chuna, Nyambate, Poparedo, the Nagamone Remidoa. Tida Ko Carsore, Ku Carsona, Tubata Samba Umba Karina, Compelton Rugua, Tendiji Samru Corner, Mala Chuna, Nyambaji Chuna. But that Tendiji in Saringu.
So now in this verse number 151, which reads, so we're in the 8th chapter, verse 151, which reads, people say this pitiful non-entity is trying to compete with me, but how can he be on par with me in learning, beauty, wealth, or pedigree? And so now, if we take, for example, a bodhisattva, remember we spoke before about Bodhisattva Lekchen, which means Lekchen means like great and excellent. So there's this bodhisattva, meaning a practitioner who has already had a full like evolvement and shift into an altruistic attitude. And a bodhisattva like this, so there's kind of 2 individuals in this sentence, and the first one is this Bodhisattva Lekchen. And Bodhisattva Lecchen, you know, great qualities of learning, great qualities of wisdom that have come out of that learning, and also has a very you know, fine form, and is of excellent class, and is of means and status, and has, you know, material wealth and so forth, everything fulfilled. Now take another individual, someone who is lower. So now the lower individual, you know, what would naturally occur? What kind of feelings and thoughts would come up with someone who was of an inferior, you know, in all ways? They would think, oh my goodness, if I could only have what Bodhisattva Lecchen have, oh, if it was only me, if only I had, you know, such fine things, if only I had such, you know, great learning. Those kinds of feelings would naturally arise. But here, one of the ways that we can probably interpret this is that rather than this being jealousy, you know, so that other person would have feelings of jealousy, but rather than this, you know, so ani dene perpagi gula kekendi lecchen yamena gangsak nipa.
Member.
Okay.
Oh, member that go. You said legend yenden that is utonda. Then this chunangala samlo kurgura.
And so what we work with in our practice as the person who is in that lower seat, rather than this being afflicted pride and jealousy, envy, covetousness, one thinks in a encouraged way, oh, all of those great qualities, all of those great things that Lecchen has, oh, if I could only get there. So it's more like an inspiration, courageous inspiration to get there oneself, rather than jealousy, out and out jealousy and covetousness. And this is 151. Would someone, a couple others read alternate translations?
Sure. Also, it seems this wretched one is competing with me. Does he have this much learning, wisdom, beauty, noble ancestry, and wealth? And that was the Wallace.
Does someone else want to read? Do we have the...
It's in the chat. I'll be happy to read it, or if someone else can read it.
Any other volunteers? Or Janet, you can.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yeah. This is the Bachelor. It is said that this deluded one is trying to compete with me, but how can he be equal with me in learning, intelligence, form, class, or wealth?
Anjit, 대단 인연봉 아ten디 지중나 산데 게디갈라 때페 개첨부 차기도아. 근데 용엔달라다 거디나 연대 민자에게 탑식기는 요마다.
라서 드네 디 갑수게실라 아니 컨디시아 체클라 디 갑수 오 녜총나 아니 삼노디 디 삼노 냠팟 시기여나 삼노 야포 시기여나 디 갑수
Tante, tende thopata sambata tezo sharap tende jingala kena nyambade.
Yeah.
Nyamba mare.
Laso.
Nyamba mare. Tende nge dumbaro tengerwa. Dumbag la ngayege mingi tabar mata. Tim chawa duguji marwa.
Laso.
Chawa duguji na ngaso lopra chipenala densem jede. 자와 누구다 말아. 자와 누구 있나? 파줘도 타지도 판바치고 나 레셈 전에 파줘도 판바치고 오라. 파줘 판바치고 말아. 거기 연대 나부징에 지진 네 지긴 인자가 봐도 거기 연대는 하길래 연대 매와 속은 인세 세계와 말아.
Oh, last.
이 개발도와.
So I checked with Geshe-la just to clear my own, just to make my own understanding clear. My question was, is this thought, so Geshe-la again said that the lower one would see the qualities, that Bodhisattva Lekchen has and say, oh, if only I could attain that. And so I just asked, in this situation, is that considered like a negative thinking or positive thinking? And Geshe-la said that this is not considered negative thinking or like bad, behavior or negative thinking, because what the other person, the one that is lower, is inspired to attain for themselves are the wisdom, like what Bodhisattva Lekchen has gained through learning and wisdom. So we want those qualities of the path. And so Geshe-la said, if we were, seeing someone, we're not talking about, if someone had material, possessions that, were like negative possessions or, samsaric worldly negative possessions. And then you want that, then that wouldn't be good thinking. That wouldn't be positive thinking. But in this way, where with that, it's a thought that is inspired to be diligent in one's own practice to be able to gain like qualities of the path. And so in that case, then this is positive.
Garda, 주제 지당 karma. 도스 구현당면 karma가지 탈설서.
So, tiene parsing tanda?
Yeah.
So
So
maybe we take a break here. It's already almost 4:30. So
tendeji 도스제나 고 란진들의 견도 통제다 딱 견 탐은 통제는 통용하게 답시지로 와. 잘하게 답시지.
So as Geshe-la, as Janice had brought up that verse from Aryadeva, Geshe-la was just checking, to see. I said, yeah, I put it on Facebook. So he said these, sometimes these verses can, be pretty tough. They are, pretty deep, right? And hard to understand. And I said, yes. And especially at the place where we're at now, because if you read like 140 to 155 without remembering, you're like in a new scene of a play where you've taken on a new role. And there's something like, how movies and so forth will have flashbacks and different things. You start watching the movie in the middle of the flashback, you don't really know what's going on. And in this case, if it's really hard because it says he and I, and we never know who he and I is. And it can be confusing if you don't remember that way back, we entered into a new kind of a role play. And once you know about the role play and with commentary, then it makes it a little bit easier. But without the commentary on what's going on, it's hard to know. And anyways, Geshe-la said that what this does is it's a new method. It's a method to help us look at our own self-cherishing attitude in a new way. And also in a way that's looking at it kind of in a more, really putting a finer microscope on it and allowing us to look closer so that we can really be clear, so that it gives us an opportunity to purify it, to clear this for ourselves. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, that Sholoka Karare, Mapchungani Badra.
Right, do right.
Re, ngapchungani padre. Tati, ngajal gombe yenden ta sungguare. Ngajal ta tenda ngadal dena nyambe. Tenda yenden ngala chuna nyambate ta popasari chire do ata ngoni chena. Tenda ngajal gombe yenden kare yore zedgala. Teta kunla tapai da ke yenden thonani. Fudan gawa ke gyurbe vikilani yonsuche se sungda. Tati karse gorzana minyam patela ta kona to kunla tapai la chanju seba ta dajin nyamji nande gene chanju seba lejin la ta pe membale tananta yunden chake tubada sambada ombate to yunda pe chimbo warwa wada tezu tubaso yun dagi yunden tonani ta chanju seba lejingi yunden tona yani ta pofudaya luila pe mi tepakene luila pofudaya gawa kigris digila soba yani pe tinikene yani pe di tinajin chopade yani yandu mi jengi chigris gawa kigris dewa tingone ngarazo selden miji thona telape mi kangalu kuguru jumjum chigirwa tena lama chombo yinanda gyawar muchi zonda jinanda mi nyamjung ani pe chanju sem mi pe yinlu tsune tangpo tangsha jila mi kankalo no o te nga zhe chigirwa wata te zonda jina ani pe ngone tseldengi yondengen tepa samba gomba yongen lejin tel tabudela mi kankalo ne pe di chupata thonda ani pe dina yinji lendo de masone chegi di gawa chigre is labre.
And now on verse number 152, we have the meditation on pride. And so, again, in this case, it's more of a inspiration of an inspiration rather than a pride. Thinking that, oh, if I only had that, that kind of a feeling. And so in 152, it says, just to hear them talk about my excellence, my reputation on the lips of all, the thrill of it sends shivers down my spine, a pleasure that I bask and revel in. So for one with these qualities, such great qualities, these are the kinds of feelings that may be instigated or arise naturally. But what's really being said here, what we look to understand here is that, for someone who is in a lower, like inferior to someone like this Bodhisattva Lechen, for example, when they see the great qualities, the great learning, the great wisdom, that, a great thrill and goosebumps, they get goosebumps all the way, all over their body. And, this is someone who automatically others will see and their hands will go together and they'll venerate, like a great Lama or His Holiness, for example. And so, when we see someone, who is very humble but has great, great qualities of learning and of the wisdom of contemplation and meditation, and all will also see this, very humble yet, great, person of great qualities, and people will see their activities in the world and they'll think, oh, if only I could achieve such a thing. So actually, rather than feeling, like so rather than thinking, this pride that this, that might come up, but being very inspired and really thrilled at seeing someone of great qualities is what we're looking to instill.
Dewa de lui dewaji, lui la jana, lui gi dewaji. Kibu de sim. Kanji, tende pe janju sebe kusung tuyi, ta jobe yendenji tong de kala, lui sim kanga de ki den yung gorwa. Gawa ki gor, lui sim kanga de ki den yung. Tende ji nge tumna sambaji tende yung gorwa. Kanji, tere ta chik tendawe chik ngaga gombe yondende ta tendi jing ngure celebrate ta pendo shivuchi ke chimbure do
And so
pajer dewa de ludeje kibo de sem gi de ki la jana pajer nigmeto pecha thomas na ta sesele gore.
And so here in this verse, Geshe-la also would like to point out a couple of particular words in the Tibetan. So there is in the fourth line of Tibetan, there is the word de, which is short for dewa, and ki, which is, so de, when it says like this de, part of de ki, this de, Geshe-la says more than likely points, because both have a positive, joyous bliss, like a connotation, but one of them is physical and one more mental. So for this de part of deki, it's like, one sees an amazing being and one is thrilled, like physically, as it says here, goosebumps is the way I read it, but it says here, shivers down my spine. Literally physically thrilled. You're impacted when you meet a bodhisattva. Physically, there is a feeling, you feel there's an energy, and this is our response. It's physically like, wow, and it's pleasurable. And also, so the key part of Deki is more like mentally, like, you see it and like, mentally you're thrilled, as it says, I revel in it. I'm just so thrilled for it. And, also this is, so there's this, one aspires then to those qualities of body, speech, and mind of a bodhisattva. One is so delighted that it physically moves one and mentally moves one in a way that one is inspired and aspires, thinking, if only I could reach those qualities.
Luise da semdeze de dewa nigala jarayate yorete chik semgi di kinyam de dang luigi ki lule kinyam se de laya mida senla kinyam se de laya jidwa ani luigi dewa de lule dewa yana ya sem ka mata wada magi bajena luigi dewa de ngon tasamshi ngon de gyurtu mida Lila semla hacha semla deki chizamji chembo yesri lila surwa dungalyo na masu te zigi nantubudo te indugala semgi deki semgi kinyam de shibuji ne chembo chade or ngoni chana duba khagare dumna digi ligi surwa dungalyo na te zigi nantubuare kebarndwa sem kibuche jede pe sem kibu mio yade sem na tangi nyomung bateki dirwa tezu ngodache tezu diche ani gewe choge ta sem tezu ngwinjine te kombeldo tangna sem gidegi yergen rugurwa
아니 카레 아니 게웨
Gewe chogi sem, ege sem, janjugi
카레
sem, jamba, nije, tepa, ta tegeti.
모진
Tenani zo sem, zopa. Ani janjugi
디
sem yuna ta telekyangre.
디 모진 체
Wote zo, ngunzinchi tubi gone te kumpeldo tang yare. Tangpo ngota yabu ma shona, ngunzin ma tubna, di kumpeldo tang tu mara. Kumazumala, kumanda ngunzinchi koro, ngunzinchi ne kumazun tukura. Ngunzin ma tubna kumazun tuku mara. Takan chibu chikyangre, tako gawe chode, ko nga zo te pento yobajita, te gi dikitigi bata hama kona, tel tona yung mar legi marwa. Shibushi ke chambari ngone chana nga zo chik semla chara chayate pe minsiba ke chambari. Tene palchara nangpe yung, te nani tepa chambi yung ma, tepa chambuji ma to, tiri semla tene tona chakwara zang lamngan kumburata. Jindani. Chajenda zo chinzir tawa pe, tumburu zay lagi arde, kanchi semgi tsangzuli adre, semde.
And so here we have the understanding that pleasure and bliss, between physical pleasure and bliss and mental pleasure and bliss, we have to understand that there's a difference. So we say that when we talk about the physical, then, we talk about pleasure. When we talk about the mental, we talk about bliss and delight and happiness. So kind of this mental state of being, like elation. So we have physical pleasure and we have mental elation. When we're working on a mental level, when we achieve a level of mental bliss within the mind stream, then this has the ability to suppress any physical difficulties that we might be that we might have. So when the mind is so blissful, actually this overrides physical discomfort, and it can suppress these anything physically that's going on. And this is something that can be accomplished, that can be attained. And attaining a state of mental peace and happiness is something that overrides suffering. And so the mind is really key here. And what are the factors that subject us to a state of not having mental happiness, this mental happiness that we say overrides our physical, our suffering? What causes us to not have that happiness is negative emotional states, these negative emotions. And so first, we need to identify and recognize the things that are have this positive mental energy, love, compassion, patience, and tolerance. These first need to be identified. For if we don't first identify them, how can we look to engender them and further develop and generate them? First, we have to identify the things that are on the positive, energies of the mind. And so, this is something that we do, because actually, if we don't understand about this practice of bringing ourselves to mental peace and happiness, if we don't know about this, then like this great delight that we can bring ourselves to, this great bliss, then we won't have any interest in doing that. We won't have interest in attaining it if we don't first know about it. And so these are all things that we work with in our meditation and our practice at a very mental, like a mental deep level. And Geshe-la says, outside of the special practices of the great vehicle within Buddhism that really work at a very deep mental level, he's not aware. He says he thinks that it's very rare to find teachings and instructions that teach about achieving a level of mental bliss that brings us to, the full, bliss. And so when we have things like the practices of meditation, like Mahamudra meditation, or the practice of Dzogchen, the great perfection, these are things that take, like that harness, like that mental, what is going on with us mentally to bring us to this bliss. So those practices work at this level.
샘 참모 원진 제지로 샘 참모의 라 뭐다 주고 알아. 뉴메sem데. 다 뉴메sem데 7월 달에 합니다. 나로래도와 수수기기 여유 말아. 말아서 왜 맞은 바람마다 원진나 이 원진나다 디디어라.
And so this is working at the level of very subtle mind, this very, like the pure consciousness, the, bare pure consciousness of subtle mind. And this is something that we don't work with outwardly, this is something that is inward. This is inside of us. It is, in us, in ordinary beings, this pure, subtle mind, untainted, subtle mind needs to be recognized. And that's what's left to do. That's the work that's left to do. Is to access this, to recognize it.
야, 다 숨바. 곰네 저로 냠슬린 술세야 되래. 다 나열 곰네 저로 냠슬린 술. 지딘 딜라 녀경 갈땡 나이 레체나 딜라 초 삼진네 다게 섭기 텔랑자스 다데 가르라오라 지딘 딜라 시디가라 딱 가자니 바드레 멤바데 좋아
가르라
가자니 바 멤버 가자데
okay
다 딜라스 제당 제노르소 에 녀경 네데 심진남게 동al 세월 레체나 텔라 제코소 소에켄 진나 라마테남 다키 미니 다키 니페섭기 녀파텔라 나워차 오시디가라 타페 다시디 chanju세바타 에 레진타 부이난다 간지 다쟁냠제기 냠는 체긴 니 체긴데기 다 소원 디섬지마다 푸냐링 볼에 펜토에게 답에 겨 치마 펜토에 덴딜레페 자르투고르와 게왈라 로 자르투고르와 와다 덴디기 강 툭툭제네페 델라라네페 녀바트테레페 라워치그리스 윤덴데 때다다 레버치 투그리스 대순고are 덴데가
gondakti di lang chakare lang
겨 치만 펜제네 게왈라 저레제야 데 투그레라브레 센디 초아타 마임바 겨 치만 펜제라니 디길레 자르투비아다 아니 베 게왈라 자르투비아 tanturla.
And so now the way of incorporating this in our practice. And so we have verse 153, which reads, even if he does have something, I'm the one he's working for. He can keep enough just to survive, but with my strength, I'll steal the rest away. And so this he, this he here is the one who is the Chite Dela the Jangchu Sampa Lection
Di das here the Chanchu Seba legendary. These Sidigala member.
Member, okay, yeah. And so this he, when it says he, this is referring to someone inferior. And when it says I'm the one he's working for, which is the first person who's speaking here, is the Bodhisattva, be it Lekchen or anyone who has already taken on altruistic intent. And so what's being said here is that virtue, I'm the one he's working for. Like we're speaking here about virtue that will be used for the good of for the long run, for the long term. Saying that this work, I will steal the rest away. Here Geshe-la says what this line means, I'll steal the rest away, means that's the part that goes to the next life. That this virtue is something that will keep going with us from life after life until, that is all leading up to this attainment of great bliss and happiness. And so that's what's being said here, that this virtue or these qualities that in the Bodhisattva, these are cumulative and will be used for the long run for the purpose of great bliss and happiness in future lives.
Ishipadere Teltobi Nageldan Delna Nimi Sambasi. Ta Nageldeda Jimatubi Nagelda Talsonina, any Gun Carriore Sidugalata, Gun Chimboyore Labgore. Carizena Tate Shologa Chekamadamino Dila Mabjungabjibat Marve. Oh, Shologa Kambatambunidere.
Okay.
Dine della Nyamjajing, Zaginatan, Tajar Jahasi de Cho, Kambatambunidigi. Chansu Zepanini, Nyomle Sidigalatape, Karsore. Lelo, Nyomle Gilelo Zadioa. Nyomle Dewala Nyambarchagres, Nyomle Sidi, and pe Chansam Dini. Nyumle ge dewale nyambar chejins da ge dungal kurdu kirne da simchen ge dungal selwe nopata ta do jarwa chigres tene ni nge thugere nge jongere nge chigin samlo me ayina ani pe tape nyumle wang to sone ani pe tende ki gewe cholon ju thu marwa ju mathina ngaran se gila ta ranjinji ye mare ani dinjin ye mare The Galata Migo Shaji, Nenipe, Zumalgi Kurchumbo Chadugores. Tindipe, Netugri, Nenjungris in the Pe Chanchu Savana Jinji to be a city, Nagalde, get Chumbo Chadi or Ese Labreta.
Ani Nyomle Sanati Onge Che Tupkimare.
Oh, the Nyomle City Galatape, the Nyomle Gilelos of the Oa. Chawang Gilolo, Nyumle Gilelos of the Oa. Punching Nyumle seen that Tinutona Maja the Namajin in Deshadre.
Sanyan Belcher
Oh, that throw making neither Mazon or throw making sorry. And Tonangini made in Deshadre. That cook Arzana, similar to shoot the Mason Raw. 당에게 와지긴 네베 밀레 펜도지긴 주슈도 기셈나 메소나 딱고 된대진 대샤고라 냠레 아니 되게 동알 ngaran jugila ti dungali wa ki gyud nga jugila ye mare ran jinjin yore renjin yore ti de gala ta pe dungal te nyumle wang de dungal le jan ro ya khur chum cha ru res ti da nga yal zana ta popa zana da ti ke chum res te dan del na hyondi yore se la verdad te ngone dua.
So before we get to 154, I don't think we read the other for 153, right? Did we, Janice, do you have another one for 153?
Sure, this is the Wallace. Even though he has wealth, we should forcibly seize it from him and give him mere sustenance if he works for us. And the bachelor, even though he has some possessions, if he is working for me, I shall give him just enough to live on, and by force, I'll take the rest.
Okay, thank you. So now the next, we enter into the next one, 154, where we're just looking at the first two lines, the first half of this verse, of the verse, the first two out of the four lines, where this is in regard to if we, if we don't, the mistake in not having pride, actually. And again, remembering that this pride is more of a kind of an inspired feeling. And so here it reads, I will wear his happiness away, and I will always hurt and injure him. Yeah, and so it's those first two lines. Di rebe geshe dini dewe nyam cha shing daki nudang tak jorcha di nipa.
And dini zele nyam chajing daki nudang tajar chasiya da otri.
Okay, yeah. I was just double checking. It was just the first two. So in this, where is happiness away? Here, Geshe-la says that we're looking at, okay, ani Geshe-la, ani shia chik, ani kando shia chikla, nyom le dang drarwa pena di le nyam, de le nyam chashing. Karigi drarwa re tila, sikrup di, ani dreshe matok di sik denso di drarwa yosamare.
Dini zele nyam chajing zidwa. Jansen dini sata jansen member the dini ani nyumle ki dewale nyam jings.
Oh,
dewale nyam parcha jings. dewale nyam parcha bai na karjana dungal ki kur pe chimbu chagres karjana dage simjing ki dungal selwe no patang dungal selwe no pata tadu dungal ta sele ki tapsilem begi marwa dungal sele tapsil mande ta dungal kati ne yo mar ngaso gila dungal gi gyudi ye mare ranchinjin yore lember denjin yore ti te gala ta pe kati ne pe dungal gyule jar rugdus jason te no popata pe misbe ke chumpres nge tugre nge jongre nge chigin siade
And so here, from Geshe-la's commentary, there's a little bit of a different meaning here in this first sentence that I'm understanding from his commentary and from his reading that commentary, where in the first sentence it speaks about I will wear like the laziness of procrastination away. It speaks to the fault of so where happiness is being worn away, what that means is that the one who is the lower one, the afflicted one, the ego, is not working on eliminating the cause of suffering. That ego who is procrastinating or wearing away happiness isn't working, isn't working towards happiness, isn't working towards eliminating suffering. That ego still has self-cherishing. That ego still has a great buy into a truth in reality. And so here it is asking us to be guided and warned against being having the procrastination, laziness, and being procrastinating, because if you don't think about happiness and don't aspire towards that great happiness, then you won't attain it. You will continue to have self-cherishing. You will continue to have an understanding of an intrinsic and true reality. And therefore, also a lot of non-virtuous activity comes from those mental beliefs, and therefore suffering comes. And so it's very important that we don't fall into wearing happiness away by being lazy and not working to attain it, but rather we should have the feeling I can do it. Really have some energy behind, and leave no stone unturned. I'm going to get this done. What someone who, and again, there are those three different kinds of laziness that we looked at, and I think we looked at them when we did Gampopa. And, the second laziness is the laziness of procrastination, of just thinking, maybe I'll do it some other time. But there's just no energy. One doesn't put the energy or effort into it. One is lacking inspiration and energy to do anything. And therefore, that kind of person will continue to have the mental attitudes of egotistic, attitude and selfishness, and really fixated to a true reality. And so it's very important that, that's not where we want to be. We want to be, so in this case, the pride that we actually are looking to develop is, a pride of, again, and the best way to say it is, I can do it. I got this. And so, that's what is being said here with, I will wear his happiness away and I will always injure and hurt him. And this he and this him that we are injuring is this egotistical self. And so for 154, Janice, what do you have?
Sure, just the first two.
Just the first two, I think, yes.
We should deprive him of happiness and always yoke him to our anguish. And then the bachelor is, his happiness and comfort will decline, and I shall always cause him harm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, ta gombendivu sita ta dajing nyamje gombendivu di sungore divu tele jidwa yang sabje ji chigdu va jeperzunge nimi sambase tambodela va jeperzunge nimi sambase jin jeperzunge pain taibegon shebase Pain Shepas, Sumbade. Then is Jinjin la Bepardam Bas, Jinjin la Pe, Bepachumukon Tape, Bezuchini, and that Dambas that the Dusini, a country subject Jitam Gadwa. Tambo the Ta, Ranjinzi, Va Jefferson, Yimi, Samba the Tampure.
Dak Chepa Sena Dila Chepa.
Tanga the Be Susu, that Jefferson Gora.
Oh, okay. Dr. Zempa.
Oh, that Jefferson, that bag, nothing, neither switchy Susu Champuchas did that Jefferson.
Okay.
That Jeffersona, that Jefferson in the Ranzin Shucher. What that Jefferson way, Nimi Sambas, Takanje, Tartuna Ranchins in Chigio Marza, Tonta Incuranda. Question your Nimi or race. That Kanjin Nimbuch Sumuda. Ani Jen Jefferson may point Tabicon Shabas, Taipicon Shabas, Tinipare, Pine Nishapas. Payun Konashe by Nisha Batachi by Ingere. Then Jen Jefferson and Bepardam Baz the subject Jitam Gudwa.
Oh, Sumpa Kariri Gonda, Kani Dampo.
Payun Nishepa.
Nipa. Penuni.
Need Konas the Payun Kangashe or the Konas the Nichibare.
Lasso. Denipa. Denisumpa.
Nipa de Dire. Jen Jefferson Pine Tabon Shepa. Jen Nipa de Jen Jefferson Pine Tabicon Shepas.
Oh, Jen Shepa.
Oh, Jen Jefferson with Tapa Pine the Namdama with thinking in Susungore.
Oh, Dinipa.
Oh, Denipare. Pine Nishepa de Sumbare.
That's all.
Then Jen Jefferson Bepardam Bas.
Okay.
This Sumpar Jipareta.
Okay. Now, moving on in the text, we look at the result of these kinds of trainings, meditations, like taking like these scenarios and meditating on them and using them to fine-tune our training. Now, what is the result of that? And the result is looked at in four ways. So we kind of have these sub-classifications, where the first is where we see the mistake in like holding oneself dear, you know, the fault in our natural tendency that like we are, you know, we're holding tight to our, you know, dear selves. And what is the fault in that? And the fault, you know, in that, of course, is that it increases, you know, self-cherishing. That, you know, if we're really like protective of ourselves, and then our selfishness and self-cherishing grows. And so this verse is saying, you know, don't do that, and that is a mistake. And then secondly, we look at the qualities of, however, extending these same feelings to others and really, really cherishing them and holding them dear. What is the benefit? What are the qualities? That's the second subcategory here of benefit. And then the third is the true, like the, you know, the very, like the benefit in its true nature, the very true nature, really getting down to things in like the very natural benefit of that. And then the fourth looks at now using in striving in diligence towards cherishing others. So we have these 4 categories where we look more closely at these particular things.
다 땅보 다 제버스 이미 삼바시야다 따기 감바 치마니 대당 다 납주 내가 받으래도 쇼로카
내가
납주 냅지바 감바 치마니다 납주 내가 봐 쇼로카 티게다 진치 버스 이미 삼바스 이미 드시거다 디 야타 탐제도 크로와달라 너빠제스 이큐란데 진데베 칼파타메 데이큐르짱 말와 쳔포 텔타부 큐기둥알 바지두스 지코날 두아타베 살부도아 다데 카르자나 란덴 푼순 소바 제번데네스 다 란덴베 용수 소바데 제번데네스 라니 제버즈 다 수수 제버즈 다 수수를 빼 분숨 잡아지 영에 단달라 수수 제버즈 거라 중거데 되게 가르치네 네 체럽 게타도 코로와 코에 세 냐와로스베 너범바지 란덤 바지 기텐치베 칼파 탐메 퍼양 귤짱스 텐메페 나와 쳔보 데다부 라라 코에 동안 바지 뚜뚜 냠도 삼바네 장심 레진 랑일라 테터 사모스 탑 당가란조 수이나로와 제더 란든 페 소소 기부지 소소 야가지 전에 섬거orde 다 토마 메바나 란든 바지 두베데 케게 라야 마리 다 네가데 디레스 다 디스 아만 디스무다 아니 투바상기 좀 된데 아니 란덴레 쩐다데 진덴 바지체네 상게로와 티 계산공고도서 지바랑게 던제다 통화생기 던제미 닝이기니 개버도 했어야 돼 그래서 삼당과 니가돌라 양겨 nem부치 삼당에 빼편부는 서로와
And so in the next section where, or the verse now, that the verses that look to explain and integrate this first point, which is the mistake in like clinging to oneself and one's self-interest, are explained in the last 2 lines of 154 and then all of 155, where we look at the point that, when we have this kind of an attitude, what comes from that, our tendency, and what will come from that is we focus our efforts on perfectly accomplishing, our own aims and desires. That's, our total, focus. We, and it's so true, right? We take such good care of ourselves. We make sure we have, everything that we need just so set and so perfectly. And, that's what we always look at doing. This is something that we are, constantly focused on. This is where we put all of our energies. But, actually, this is a mental attitude, a mindset that's been habitual since, time without beginning. We always have been looking to take care of our, our own business, our own happiness. Whereas if we look at the Buddha, the Buddha and the Buddha Shakyamuni, so the difference here is that the Buddha, so we've simply paid attention to our own self and interests, where the Buddha has seen the fault in this and has only intent and works for the benefit of others. And that is, a major difference. And as we heard about before in one of our, in one of our, I think I have this, yeah. Let's see. I think it came, so I will find it. It is one of the verses that Geshe-la gave before, I think, that went up onto, oh, here it is, that came from the Lama Chöpa supplication that said, cherishing myself is the doorway to all downfalls, while cherishing others is the foundation of every good quality. Grant your blessings that I may practice that which is essential, the yoga of exchanging self and others. And so basically that's saying the very same thing. And so now if we read these verses, this end of 154, he is the one who in samsara did me mischiefs by the 100. Countless ages, O my mind, you spent desiring to attain your aims, and what great weariness it was, while your reward was only misery. And other translation?
We all have been afflicted in the cycle of existence hundreds of times by him. Countless eons have passed away while you sought your own benefit. With this great toil, you have gained only suffering. That was Wallace, and now for Bachelor. For hundreds of times in this cycle of rebirth, he has caused harm to me. Because of desiring to benefit yourself, O mind, all the weariness you have gone through over countless past eons has only succeeded in achieving misery.
디 솔로가 야다 숨주 받으래도 니슈 들고 받대 망도시네 지자 지바랑게 던졌다 동원생게 던지게 니니기니 개발도 했어.
아니 준죽나라 야마나 라마 쳬파나라.
라마 쳬파나라 요 준죽나라 디 야다 니슈 들고 받았다. 준죽나라 망도시네 지자 알아래. 동원생게 던졌다 지바랑게 던졌다 동원생게 던지게 니니기니 개발도 했어 손래.
Okay. So Geshe-la is reading further. I think it's 129, right? Gyadang Nishitsa Gyupa.
Okay,
129 says the same thing.
직발에.
All the
ditana dila jargina pe misba pendo yonsarwa. Dina ranjinzingi kyendi sheendi gala ta ko thomma bang alto ranjinzin chene dos chene 좀 뭉타 망보다 야책이 말은 뭉타 망보 다 토마 매번에 코라 코르데로 소소 야후지 요노스인데 코라 메시지거라 간지가 그 두비입니다 다 투앙상기 좀 된데 아니 젠덴제네 상게로 다 빼다가 맞으지겨다 전주 세비지겨다 급지콜로 차서
가리차서 정치 템페
다 젠덴제네 상게버레 란던제네 수수톤다다 유튜브에 말아 젠덴네 까니까니 어딘디 양니암도 삼당과도 패키지 모두 와.
And so here, what's being said, is the same thing we just read in the, in the Lama Chöpa prayer here in Guru Puja. In verse number 129, the same thing. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. And so this is really, a very concise, point. This is like the quintessence of what we have to understand is the difference between these two things, the enlightenment state of being an enlightened being of the Buddha, or of being circling in samsara. The Buddha, through focusing on altruistic intent with every wish and action for the benefit of others, what was the result? The result was the state of Buddhahood. And what is the result of continued self-cherishing, to think about ourselves all the time, only about ourselves while not thinking about others? Then this is just a constant, as it says, kalpas and kalpas, countless ages, eons, of samsaric existence. And so Geshe-la says that, this brings it down to a nutshell point. And this is what you need to think about again and again, is, altruistic intent accomplishes Buddhahood, while selfishness and while we try to accomplish our purpose, actually we never accomplish our purpose. So like self-centeredness and being self-agended never even accomplishes, your one's purpose. And he says, think about that again and again, reflect. Oh, Pelcher Antron. Oh, lasso. Oh, okay, we have a difference. Yeah. Lasso.
Jiten dungal chinge pan jiten la sunre jila dungal chuina tanang gwe na sa jina da dungal kandi chuna de va dewan dobal va den doli chunres ran chinjin chen chunres ta ran chinjin da jen chinjin yende si tikete shibushi ne chambore.
So now Geshe-la says there is another, excellent verse, which is because Geshe-la's numbers in his book and the numbers of the book that I'm reading are one-off. I've already read it. So I'm going to read it again because this is the one he just gave commentary on. It's, for us, it's 129. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing for the happiness of others, and all the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. And this is so true. Any favorable, pleasurable, anything good and happy that comes to us comes from a heart that has put the energy into caring for others, the altruistic intent. Every happiness, that is the source. Every suffering and pain that we can experience, be it a headache or whatever pain and misery we go through, has been the cause of trying to make effort for our own good. When we try to simply make everything good for ourselves and take care of ourselves, that's the cause of suffering, while caring in the same way for others is the source of our happiness. And so again, what this is bringing it down to is looking, are we focused on self or are we focused on other? So therefore, as Geshe-la has just read that one, the one that he meant before, with that nutshell of this is a concise, precise way to point out the very crux of whether we're a Buddha or a samsaric sufferer is here. Is there need for lengthy explanation? Childish beings look out for themselves, while Buddhas labor for the good of others. See the difference that divides them.
디 쇼로간디 나치니데 직 통사질레티네 자 양양도 삼당과 백개첨부래. 이 중에나 란진진레 균 또서 티부질 따투이나 셈기디기 말하지 계직하는 거야 그래. 된 돔 전부 개그도.
So these two verses that we've just read are extremely meaningful and are very, very impactful on one's practice and on the result that one will receive on one's, in one's, very practically speaking, in one's practice. And so one should always think about these two, these two verses that we have just said, that we've just recited. So for me in Padmakara, it's 129 and 130. Because actually, if we continually think about these two, like never let, always constantly, remember them, then it's absolutely sure that this will have an impact on a person who is self-cherishing, an individual who is selfish. If we want to damage this self-cherishing attitude and combat it, target it, and really tackle it, then these are the two that you want to constantly remember. They're very, very meaningful.
And
His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always referring in particular to these two verses.
란진진 너무 맞으면 란진진을 견도 다 맞으나 되니 백하버리 란진진 넘tum나 자동적에 8천 구구 말해서 되게 어려움이습니다.
양kirchik?
자동적에 여러와 장주석의 자동적에 여러와 란진진데 아버지 넘투비나 란진진 라견도 따투비나 되니 자동 구구 말했습니다. 사회 동화 쪽에 된 구구 말했어.
드네 동고 말해, 로고 말해.
말해. 되니 자동 용어 말씀 거래.
냠게 말해. 냠게 말해.
자동 구구 말해. 장주 셈내 냠게 말해.
라소.
어때 뺏게 쳔버래. 대마다 맞아 자동 강가 란진이 왕기 용거 알아.
And so we have the and so this, the Dalai Lama is constantly emphasizing these two verses because they're crucial points. When we come to think about the mindset and activities of a high-level bodhisattva, one of, such sharp, like intuitive and altruistic thought, intention, and action, it all comes down. So the activities of a bodhisattva and developing them all come down to whether or not one can develop bodhicitta in one's mind stream. If this mindset can be developed, if you can develop it. And if you don't see a problem in the attitude of self-cherishing and being egotistic, why would you ever, if you don't see a problem in it, then why are you going to try to tackle it? And then there's no possibility of of true altruism to arise in your mind. But also, His Holiness also is always saying that, so we have the Bodhisattva vows, that we take, and like the root vows of Bodhichitta. And, so it's said that if we hold Bodhichitta, we will never transgress the vows. So there won't be any reason to ever have to repair them or work with the vows, because we will always uphold them. One who has Bodhichitta will always uphold the Bodhisattva vows and won't be transgressing them. They won't be degenerated. So what is the reason that generally we degenerate or transgress our vows, our Bodhisattva vows and activities? It's self-cherishing. Self-cherishing leads us to transgress our vows.
당원이 그 전부도 왔다가 란친진을 끈 님이 마통나 배 가버려. 다 란친진 님이 본 전주는 양도 숨고도 와. 배 말아서 란친진 와서 강에 줄여야 되는데 현들 따뜻 그한테 뺏게 전버려.
So it's hard to combat self-cherishing, very, very hard to combat this attitude that we constantly find ourselves in the throes of, because, this is something, because it's something that's very, very hard to combat. You also notice, right, that again and again through the chapters of this book, through all the verses of this book, constantly brings us back to looking at negative mental state, at destructive emotions, at that come from self-cherishing. And this is because it's very, very hard to combat this. So again and again, the text brings us back to looking at the misgivings and faults of holding these kinds of attitudes.
Yeah.
So why don't we leave it here in the text for today, and what questions do you have? Yeah, although for some of us, we're now approaching the next hour. And, if Geshe-la says for him, the time is no problem. We're closing in on 6, but if you have questions for him, it's no problem. Please ask. And so Geshe-la says to, read this text and, read it well. Actually, earlier he had said that we should never let it leave our mind, in terms of combating these attitudes that we find so naturally there all the time, that we should read the text in a way that it never leaves us. And also here he said, now go back and, read these verses that we've been just speaking about. Well, it's a possibility that as he says that as he offered a commentary that he made mistakes. He is no, great expert in this, and it's possible that he was mistaken. So please read it well, and then also yourselves consult. There are different commentaries that have been written on these, in particular, that will walk us through, and to consult all of the different commentaries to really know it well. Oh, inside this one book, there are several, there are various commentaries on the way of the Bodhisattva.
Kepe sungzul pe manda do se sungdu indinan sungdu.
And so expressed by some really great masters have the commentaries and are written in that particular book.
Oh, that tendi indigala that tegi kondongi shologa nijin tansante lozin te samtaina palchar shuji pemboyare. Ani susu thonsa tini thonsa jilaja ani kadina samtaina masu junju liu yepa chazang lozun tu maro khabro. Nenga pe lemi damasona ti pe kasa lemi damasona te jizine ani samtaina susu modatangi na da karechegina teloina samtande yorwa.
Demik sena di pena? No, Nangshin.
Oh,
Demik yeah.
Demi naji chagro ko.
Oh, Demik Nangshin. Oh, lasso. Oh, yeah.
Keyword.
Lasso.
That government tezo gachikatamba keyword chadiore. Government temada taka sungumare katina te sunguda.
And so these two verses in particular that I've just mentioned, please memorize them, memorize these two verses. And if you commit them to memory and you can bring them to mind and recall them again and again, it will be, very, very beneficial. And it would be very hard to memorize all of chapter 8, but if you can memorize the key verses, like the crucial points, the key verses, that's what would be, very, very helpful here. And again, His Holiness is always mentioning these two verses. And so what you can do is you can have it written down in different places where you go about in your house or in your car, wherever, write, these verses so you'll see them. And also then before you know it, you'll have them committed to memory. And these verses are like the key that, allows you to open your car door and drive your car. Like a key is actually what allows you access, and so memorizing these verses is like having the key. And if it weren't so, then His Holiness wouldn't in particular be mentioning these verses all the time. Does anyone have a question?
I do.
Janice.
Geshe-la briefly mentioned when he was talking about achieving a level of mental bliss, he mentioned Mahamudra meditation and Dzogchen, and said that those practices work at that level of the very subtle mind, and that accessing this, recognizing this, that's the work that's left to do. Would he speak a little bit more about that?
Geshe-la, the deki gikola drashe gyaptu kerang di chakchen dang zogchen gi nyamlen gikola dang ani sem tramo dang sem nyuma ani ngozen shaya kalchampore ngato di deki di toktu yona ngato di tekchen gi nyamlen de nangshen di sem tramo ngozen shaya de sem nyuma ngozen shaya de kola that's mangwa sungro chesa.
Chazan deda ngone re ta chajin so jin za chimbo re za mazana chilon ke nyamnin chilon jamba jin lenda ngin yo marwa rangi sem sangi sem rapa de pha selwachi nyumung chogi semde mease any nyumung chogi semde chizam mea chaziri any nyumung kaza sebe chaziri any sem thamo sanang saru yoyaji yungore Chazan sem tramu wenzin tubina 차속의 냠니 때리마다 들라 차속의 냠니 요 말에 다 뉴미셈들 조조 뉴미셈데 다텔라 에 점발룽당 아니베 타와 뉴미셈딩이 아니 다페 냠도
Karigilong.
점발룽 셈기 점바드 룽차들 룽 말한서 룽 와다티 시부스케 첨버리 인규 세상에 그뒤에는 아주 셈라 따지던 거래 시디가라 시부지 말아서 셈라 녀몽원도 기르데 간데지 것도
Kare kondak.
녀몽스 원도 기르데가라 셈데 하정 마기 버차고도 셈 하정 라바차고 그래 여름이지 밖에 애리조나 전주 난두가라 콘루페 살텝네니 콘루 옴주고도 이 가르쳐 버려래 콘루 문진 두고 와라 또 콘루 살텝이 온데가라 셈나 마기 바질레 그러와 란진진 슈슈 좀뭐 슈체르샤가라진 아니베 때제드가라 와다 콘루 문진 두고 문진 두나 티견도 통과래 대 문진 맞으나 티견도 통과 말해 현도 맞으나 가래요래 아니 남의 제 리두고 그래 현도 통나 현대 까야 동열레가 눈발레기로 딘디 윤도 가랑서 셈을 슈다던 것도 뺀 미스밖에 정보래
Ani gyawarum pache de korla ani sumpare de korla.
여름부터 깡 준주 난두가라 에로조나 zubiliu nansu logi zubiliu 아니 zopa katula taso zopegi mitin jode kontrolwa
laso
아니 kontrol 깡준 홈주고 난기도 살 때문에 아니 여름부터 가르선서 나 뭐시여 이나 미자 먹다베 셈나 먹기 버 간대요 와데 하고 그러다 나 뭐시여 말선서 딩만서 빼 미시오 깨침버리 윤도 셈나 슈다 당과데 빼 란셈 란로란로 꼰줄 차고 말와
la
수수스인데 수수라 고도 길고 말와 수수스인데 수수라 하고 그러와
laso yeah
대인디가라 그뒤에는 셈나 슈다 당과데 빼 미시오 깨침버리 애니 콘트로자디가 콘트로자디지 뉴몬징기 셈기디가라 마기바 가져 연구도 디 유데 까고르와 빼미서 깨침버리 이게 깨침버리 깨다 침버리 맞으디 삼다 최제지디가라 점바진지 진랩진 나에 여바선디 삼로 고르고와 대다 말해 나란주 유래 여겨 셈데 아니 빼 문진 툼네 셈기 견데셀 셈기 연된데 아니 캐필 콤펠도 땅고 거다 베즈제니 콤펠 땅고 거래 땡겐드랑 라요 때 인자 좀 된데 랑이랑 건설수래 랑긴 다야 랑이 인라브래 좀 된데 수래
rangi rang
랑이랑긴 거야인 랑이랑긴 다야 인설수래 소소 안에 녀몽 처럼 로디베 녀몽베 자와데제나 랑긴 다다 랑 차선 소소 안에 베 셈기 연된 통전 셈기 연된 잠바다 니질로 소바 셈기 연된 통네 디 캐빌도 다나 랑은 건데 랑 차선
So when this is a very, very important point that gets down to the heart of practice, a heart of practice that isn't found, for example, as you've mentioned, the practices of Mahamudra and the Great Perfection are not things that are practices, are parts of the path that evolve like external practice. But this is a very personally and like inner work where we are looking at the mind. And when we look to bring our mind to a place of the elimination of arising negative emotions, arising negative thoughts. It is a place where we have settled the mind into a place where all coarse thoughts and afflictions have subsided, and with them being subsided, then the actual nature of mind becomes very, very clear. And we come to a point where we can identify that which is this subtle stream of consciousness, the subtle mind consciousness. And this is something that we practice when we're practicing this Mahamudra and Dzogchen, where what we're basically doing is we're accessing this state of mind and wind. The very, very subtle mind runs along this, like the wind energies. And so this is what we're doing. And there are ways that we, whether we're practicing those two particular kinds of practice, there are methods to do that. Again, eliminate the coarse afflictions, bring the state of, come to the state of a mind that doesn't have arising thoughts and afflictions, where the mind, the true mind, the subtle mind becomes clearer and clearer. So to be able to do that, what we need to do is to constantly be looking inwardly to see mentally what is happening, to connect with our mental body, so to speak. And we look to connect with an afflicted mind and examine when you have an affliction of some kind, when they become obvious and apparent, when they're arising, how does that feel? And you can look and right away see that your mental state has become agitated. And that's one point of recognition. So as to recognize recognize when you do have that which we are trying to eliminate, afflictive emotions and thoughts, negative thoughts, and so forth. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, while giving instructions and commentary on the way of the Bodhisattva chapter, Liu Zerpagi Liu Katsure Gondak Jason is the sixth on patience, which is the sixth chapter. And so the antidote to, or the opposite of patience is anger. So in the commentary, anger came up. So he was talking about working with the affliction of anger as he was instructing, and he said to visualize an angry, like furious mindset, arouse fury and anger, and look at that. And he said what you will see is you will see a mind, like a mental state that is very unhappy. You become very unhappy. In this way, you can see fault in your anger. And so, His Holiness, said to do that. And so if we can constantly be like looking at what's going on in our mind, then we can, really come to a point where we're always, looking at that mind and always knowing. And it's actually only we ourselves who can ever know the state of our own mind. There's, no one else. This is work that we need to do. We need to constantly do this. So when we see, for example, anger, then we have to now backtrack and say, okay, so here's an afflictive emotion, the emotion of hatred or anger, and this is something I'm looking to eliminate. So I have to cease the cause. I have to cut the cause that has this arise. And so this is how you work with it. One by one, we can work with, our afflictions. And, His Holiness made a comment, kind of a joking comment, during that teaching about as if he had clairvoyance to see like all the anger, you know, that was arising in people's minds. But in any event, this is something that we ourselves need to do ourselves, for ourselves, with our own minds. That which is called the Dharma, practice of the Dharma, isn't something that comes from receiving some kind of blessing. We're doing our own inner work. And as we do our own inner work, we recognize that which needs to be eliminated, begin to apply those antidotes. So we find faults with that which is to be at fault and work on remedying that, while at the same time, so as we're looking to eliminate from the mind stream, remember we're working to bring ourselves to a point of the elimination, the total subsiding of afflictions, to be able to see this nature of mind. So we're looking to see fault and eliminate those faults, but at the same time we're looking to further and further increase the good qualities of mind, love and compassion, those things that actually will be beneficial. And as the Buddha, so this is all inner work. And the Buddha himself said that, you know, we are our own master or our own enemy. And when we have arising, like when we're all worked up and furious and angry and have negative thoughts and emotions, this is when, you know, we're our own worst enemy. And when we have, you know, the qualities, when we have endearing qualities of love and compassion and caring manifesting that in our mind, then we're our own best friend, just like as the Buddha said. Did that answer your question, Janice?
Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you, Diane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, then.
Oh my. Yeah. Geshe-la says you're probably all worn out and sore, so we're past 6 now.
Sancho sem chorimboche, make pana kengurche, kewa nyamba me payam, kone kondo pewaro so, kanji rawe, kuru jinkanda, pendande wa malinjo. Chereze wan tinzin gyatsoyi, jabe site pato tenguruchi, jamba pawe chiltar kemba, kondo zampo te ante jinte, teta kunji shisu dalo chirke wandi dada, rabdo ngo, tisum shibe gyawa tamjeki, ngo kanla choto ngo, Bodhichitta,
the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decrease, but ever grow further and further. And the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit, flows in your person, Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyamso, or mind, until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri obtained omniscience, and as did Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and the future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you.
care, everyone. Stay safe. Be well. See you next
You
time.
too.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Geshe-la.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Diane.
You're welcome.